you everyone for joining us today. Welcome. On behalf of the Data Science for Everyone Coalition, welcome to Innovating Math in Higher Education. While we are waiting for folks to join the Zoom, we would also invite you all to introduce yourself in the chat. So state your name, organization, and why you're interested in joining the event today. My name is Zarek Drozda. I'm the Program Director of Data Science for Everyone. To give you a little bit of background on our work, DS4E is a national initiative, coalition, and community based at the University of Chicago, striving to catalyze the adoption of data science and data literacy as a basic component of K-12 education. We began some of our work under the leadership of economist Steve Levitt, following a viral Freakonomics podcast back in 2019, where we spotlit a number of programs who are already working on data science in the K-12 space. And we currently work on 4 things: raising awareness, gathering and catalyzing classroom resources, community building, and then policy as it relates to data science education. For today's conversation, we are thrilled to have a slate of experts from different domains of higher education. In a moment, I'll turn the conversation over to our moderator, Melody Baker, the policy director at Just Equations. We're also joined by Sarah Spence Adams, professor at Olin College of Engineering, Alan Garfinkel, professor at the University of California, Los Angeles, and Brendan Kelly, the director of Introductory Mathematics at Harvard University. While this event does not strictly focus on K-12 data science education per se, we organized this session to help put a spotlight on the way higher education programs approach quantitative analysis and mathematics across disciplines, with examples in engineering, biology, and the social sciences. How these program leaders are training their students in quantitative methods relevant for their field. We hope this will help our K-12 audience unpack the black box of mathematics preparation for a variety of degree programs, and show how leading institutions around the country are approaching quantitative preparation in a modern world with changing technology. Before beginning the event, we would also like to remind everyone about the DS4E community standards. We believe everyone belongs in the data future and that healthy debate is productive and beneficial. We welcome coalition members from all walks of life and those with diverse viewpoints to ensure robust and supportive participation in the organization as a whole and in DS4E events. All participants in organizational leadership will be held to a code of conduct that creates an environment of respect, inclusion, and effective communication. You can learn more about the community standard, including how to report violations, on our website, and a member of our team will drop that link in the chat. And in order to allow our speakers to focus on their conversation, we will be limiting the chat functions for the remainder of the event. If you have a question you would like to ask the speakers, please private message Samara. To do this, go to the chat and select Samara from the drop-down menu of names.
I also wanted to apologize really quickly. Our settings accidentally got limited a little ahead of time, so people were unable to introduce themselves in the chat. We will drop some links that you can join the conversation around data science for everyone in other ways.
Awesome, thanks, Lily. Well, with that final reminder, I'll pass it to the floor to Melody to kick off moderating our conversation.
Thanks again, Zarek. And again, my name is Melody Baker. I'm the National Policy Director at Just Equations, a policy institute focused on expanding math opportunity. I am so excited to be here among these innovative leaders that are introducing diverse math options that challenge students while developing the skills necessary for a society that thrives off of data and technology. Panelists, so that our attendees can get to know a little bit more about you, could you briefly share your names and describe your work?
Sure. Who's up first?
I'll start with you, Alan.
Okay, let me share my screen because I want to show you some slides, and I have promised to keep it short. So can you see my slide here?
Yes, we can.
Great. So I'm Alan Garfinkel. I'm from UCLA. I'm a professor of medicine and integrated biology and physiology. And I want to tell you about the class that we teach to freshmen UCLA life sciences students with no math prerequisite whatever. So it's a modeling class. And we start on day 1 with this slide and we say, okay, put a bunch of sharks and a bunch of tuna in a big patch of ocean, and what happens? And the students say, well, the sharks eat the tuna. And you say, yes, and then what happens? And they go, oh. So you begin to think about the different forces that contribute to shark births and shark deaths and tuna births and tuna deaths. In other words, you begin to make a model. And you start with a boxes and arrows model, shark births, tuna deaths, and the all-important product term, the nonlinear product term there, shark meets tuna. The modeling approach then goes from the boxes and arrows model to what we call a change equation. And in a change equation, we take all of the what makes S go up, what makes T go up and down, what makes S go up and down. We assemble them into a change equation. And of course, you're saying differential equation, but this is a change equation. These are finite change vectors computed from the model. So this modeling approach, we think is really important. It's really important for students to see analogies, to see that the shark tuna model is the same kind of model as a chemical reaction where sodium meets chloride and they form sodium chloride. These kinds of analogies are very important for understanding dynamics. But then the question is, once we have a change equation, what do you do with it? And the one thing that we do not do with it is any kind of symbolic manipulation whatsoever. No integration by parts, no substitution of variables, no stupid pet trick for solving trivial and typically linear differential equations. We stay away from that. Instead, the change equation is there to set up a vector field. And the vector field assigns change arrows to every point in state space, in this case, shark tuna population space. And from the arrows, you can already begin to see what the prediction of the model is going to be. But how do we make that precise? Well, these are all unsolvable. They have no analytical solution. So we use Euler's method. And the students learn Euler's method, and they learn enough Python to write their own little Euler's method script and to do the integration of the differential equation. Here's a computed trajectory using the Python code. In other words, what I'm saying is 19th century math, which is the math of bang on symbolic expressions to get other symbolic expressions, is dead. It has been replaced by 20th century math with rigorous concepts like vector field, a function from state space into tangent space, and the associated mathematics. We believe that the 20th century concept, in addition to being more rigorous, also makes much better pedagogy and offers a very different view of what math is from this stuff. And we have a textbook as a free PDF at Springer. That's our class. We're currently teaching it to 2,000 freshmen a year. And I will quit.
Wow, Alan, that was an excellent presentation. I wish that I was your math student, especially to learn 21st century math. I guess we'll move to Sarah Spence. You're up next.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm Sarah Spence Adams. I'm a professor at Olin College of Engineering. This is my 21st year at Olin. I'm a professor of mathematics and electrical and computer engineering. I also spent several years as an associate dean of faculty. And my background is in wireless communications, sort of at the intersection of math and engineering. But in more recent years, I've moved into K-12 outreach, K-12 education, doing professional development, not only for higher ed now, but for pre-college teachers as well. One of my classes that I'm teaching right now actually has college students teaching math and engineering workshops to elementary school and middle school kids in the community. And that is my brief background. I think I'll get into some of my different courses a little bit later.
Well, thank you, Sarah, for that introduction. I'm really looking forward to hearing those courses later. We will go to Brendan Kelly from Harvard University.
Hi, I'm Brendan Kelly. I'm the Director of Introductory Math here at Harvard. I help support our introductory courses from pre-calculus through linear algebra, differential equations, probability, and statistics. I am very interested in modernizing the curriculum and thinking about what quantitative tools our students need to step up to their aspirations and interests. And I'm excited to share with you some things that we've been working on here.
This is exciting. So I guess since we don't have a lot of time, we'll jump right into it. So as Eric mentioned, I am sure that our K-12 audience is eager for us to unpack this black box of mathematics preparation for degree programs and to share how each of you are finding new ways to make quantitative preparation interesting for students and aligned with the needs of the 21st century. Could each of you describe your introductory math courses briefly and give an example problem from one of your courses that will capture the novelty of your approach?
Maybe I'll, go ahead, Brett.
Sarah, you first.
Okay, so at Olin, we're part of a very small percentage of schools that do require calculus when, to get into Olin. But I will say that all of us at Olin really strongly believe it's not actually the calculus content that we need. And, admission is always something that's constantly evolving. But what we find is students just need some amount of mathematical maturity, which we mean they've done something hard and they've struggled through it, and they've kind of have that experience of this is technical and difficult, and I've struggled and I've kind of made my way through it. So one of the things that we've done from the very beginning at Olin, so the first year curriculum has changed probably 6 major times in the 21 years that I've been there. In the current incarnation, we teach math entirely integrated with physics, programming, and engineering. So they're learning all kinds of technical content, all smushed together in the context of really exciting real-world projects. So to give you a sense of this from a content perspective, we have actually shifted the material around so that they do not require any calculus in the first semester, because we find that even if your students have had calculus, it's very uneven from high school to high school. So we actually go into linear algebra, which anecdotally is working well. Students sort of learn how to do college before those differences in preparation really show up, because not many students have had linear algebra at all. So to give a sense of the first, some of the first experiences they have in what we would consider a math class, integrated math, on the first day of one of the classes, this is actually a class that my colleague John Geddes has developed, who's actually in the room. The students build physical boats on the first day, and they're told the design requirements for these boats. They physically build boats, put them in a huge pool, and basically watch that they all fail the requirements of if you tip it so many degrees, what has to happen? If you tip it more, what has to happen? And that's sort of the motivation for, okay, we're going to have to learn some actual mathematics and quantitative skills to be able to build boats that will actually work to the design constraints. So from day one, that's their first year of math. But in all of our classes, we are very hands-on. So they are using their hands, often with physical things, whether it's, a boat or a robot or something else. We're very hands-on to get them thinking of math as this tangible tool they can use, rather than this other subject that's, sort of this old subject that Alan was speaking about from the 19th century.
This is definitely a great webinar. I'm really enjoying this, and especially the hearing about the approach to starting with linear algebra. I would have never thought that could be a great way to kind of even the playing field. Thank you.
Yeah,
for sharing.
it's counterintuitive because it's more advanced, but none of them have seen it. And there's no reason that they can't learn linear algebra. It's just that traditionally that's not the order that it's done, but there's nothing inherently harder about it. And in fact, it's more intuitive. It has really great applications in the world. So it actually seems to be going pretty well so far.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing. We will go to Brendan. You're up next.
Great. Yeah. So, I mean, our introductory math program offers a lot of different courses, but I want to highlight one that I've designed in the past year for economists and social scientists, and it shares a lot of design themes with what Sarah just described. The whole point is to really give students the quantitative tools they need to approach concrete and authentic problems. And I think that's different than a standard calculus class, in which what typically happens is you think about a skill like related rates and you try and wedge in some application, as opposed to starting with the application and the problem you want to solve and develop the mathematics you need to solve that. An example, this semester we started off working with a partner at LL Bean who gave us the results of an A/B test that they conducted. So they tracked 5 million customers at LL Bean, and they gave 95% of those customers a 25% off discount code, and they sequestered 5% of the customers and didn't give them a discount. And so we tracked buying behavior over the next 30 days. The promotion was a 5-day promotion, but we wanted to see over 30 days what was the impact in the two groups. And the students had to think, there's no one way to approach this problem. There's so many things you need to think about. You need to think about revenue, you need to think about profit, you need to think about customer lines, you need to think about, the data also include recency. How long ago did that customer last engage with LL Bean? What has been their lifetime engagement with LL Bean? And as a final project, they had to put together a pitch deck to the executives at LL Bean to say, should they run promotions like this again in the future? What changes should they make? What are the strengths and what are the weaknesses? It was incredibly quantitative. There was optimization problems, there were confidence intervals, there's profit modeling, but it was all focused on the authentic problem. And I think that's what got students interested. And once you have students interested, I think that's where learning starts. If you can capture their curiosity and interest, and Sarah, it's a lot like what you were saying, like if they're building that boat and it's not doing what it's supposed to do, there's now this intellectual need to learn the mathematics. The code, the data that we received was 300,000 rows of data and 50 columns. And so it also necessitated that they wrangle some data in R. And so we had to teach some data wrangling skills. We had to teach them how to plot, interpret, visualize, manage the data. And the students bought into this because they knew that at the end, they were pitching their strategy to executives at LL Bean. So that's like a taste of what I mean by an authentic problem and how that can motivate lots of different mathematical tools.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing, Brendan. Real world problems, leveraging real world data, getting an opportunity to actually pitch to a CEO. That's the type of math that I wish that I would have learned in college. That's really exciting. Thank you for sharing. Let's go to Alan, or you're up next.
Well, I've already described the course that we teach. I will say that the modeling has, the next unit that we talk about after sharks and tuna and chemical equations is epidemiology. And we make a COVID transmission model where the key term is susceptible meets infected, just like shark meets tuna, just like sodium meets chlorine. And the student learns these analogies. And I think it's a very powerful tool. I think Brendan's right. Once you want to, nobody looks at you and says, when am I ever going to use math to predict the course of an epidemic? So it's a very natural, it's an easy sell in that sense. A lot of our students are pre-med, and the medical schools are calling for better education and understanding dynamics. And that's what we're providing. So there's a lot of motivation there. And I can't resist, can't hold myself back from saying something bad about traditional calculus classes. They are spirit killers. And the math that you learn, substitution of variable, trivial little trick for solving equations no one is interested in, is just a device for weeding out precisely the people that you don't want to weed out. And the idea that, well, if they've had calculus and they've seen rigorous math, I'm not interested in rigorous math. I'm interested in using math to understand the real world. And this rigor, they have to see limits, they have to see the technical development of the subject, I think is a lot of, excuse me, a lot of old white guys talking about 19th century math. Sorry.
No apology necessary. Thank you for sharing. You know, it's about relevant math, and that's what we're here to talk about, ways to engage students in interesting ways to do it. I mean, Alan, what it sounds like you're talking about is what Sarah and Brendan is talking about. It's critical thinking, challenging problems, like being able to persist through things that through math problems that make sense to students. And I mean, at the end of the day, that's what's going to really create that stickiness, you know, that comprehension, so that they can take it, you know, to other classes and to even to their career and beyond. So
I love Sarah's example, by the way, of, hey, the boat sank. I guess we need to go back to the drawing board. I think that's a great motivator. Sorry to interrupt.
No, I love it. I agree. I think that if the boat sinks, that we need to figure out how to make it not sink. And if I was a student in that class, that'd be a fun class that I'd go home and tell everyone about. But it's a great segue into our next question. So the college that I attended, it only offered traditional general math courses for my major. And the content that we learned, it was expected to be well-rounded enough to address the needs of the program, to develop proficiency, and to prepare us to be successful in our careers. Why did you decide to create a math course tailored to your degree program? And I guess for this one, we will start out with Sarah.
I think that's a great question. I think it's interesting though, coming from Olin, everything we built, since I was there since we welcomed our first class. Olin's a new college, only 21 years in operation. Like we were built to make math for engineers. All of our students are engineering majors. So I don't have a great like turnaround story that we were doing this boring calculus for 100 years. And then we decided, oh, maybe we should do something kids care about. We sort of started the whole premise there, but it is interesting over the 21 years, we have changed that first year and a half of math to kind of move with the times of what are students these days interested in, how are the students, how are they changing, like what students we're getting in through the door. So I think our overall goal always in all of our classes is like, how can we make this relevant to our students' current needs and to where we think they might be going in the future. You know, an 18-year-old doesn't necessarily know all of the careers they might want to do, but we do know they're engineering majors. So everything we do from the minute they walk in the door, we just try to connect with their interests and then bring in the technical skills that we think they're going to need to like thoroughly address the problems that they're interested in. So for us, I think it's just every class at the whole school, how do we make it relevant and useful? Like we like beauty as well, for sure. We do like the beauty of math, I think, at least some of us, but we really focus on the
Oops.
It looks like Sarah froze a moment. So since we're limited on time, Brendan, can you jump in for that question? Why did you decide to create a math course tailored to your degree program?
Yeah, so my context is actually not tailored toward math concentrators or math majors. I'm really thinking about economics majors or students studying government. But the impetus was my first year at Harvard, I had advisees who were also in my class, which was a Calc 1 class. And 4 years later, I stayed in touch with them through their time at Harvard and caught up regularly, and then was invited to their honors thesis presentation in economics. Both of them ended up studying economics. And I was so deeply impressed with the quantitative tools that they were using. There were, econometrics was kind of a backbone to the work that they were doing to understand the world. And it was also amazing how the object of study was so important in their own lives. So one student was studying educational outcomes in California for students who were English language learners. And that was his lived experience. And he was working with a huge data set and really dug into the econometrics and the methods he had learned in his degree, but failed to see how all of this was related to what we had done in our calculus class. And the other student who I worked with, he did his thesis on health outcomes for Oklahoma tribes when gambling became legalized on reservations. And again, that was his context, that was his lived experience. And the data sets he was working with were, huge data sets, and the quantitative methods were the backbone of the study, but nothing about the calculus experience was foundational for him. And so I thought, if that's the end result, if we want students investigating their world and better understanding how policy impacts their community, or what change they need to be making in the world, what's the mathematical experience that needs to happen the first year? And I think it's very different than a standard calculus class. And so that was the impetus for the design. There are challenges. Not everything can be a thesis and individually driven. So it's how do we find projects that are kind of at the center of students' attention and interests, and that they can approach and really gain some quantitative tools while they're working on them. So that's been what's animating this work.
Thank you for sharing, Brendan. Alan, how about you? Did you decide to create a math course that was tailored to your degree program?
Absolutely. Our students are biologists. They're physiologists. Many of them are, about half our class is pre-med. They're ecologists. They're neuroscientists. And they need to understand things that are just not in freshman calculus. And they need to understand feedback loops. And feedback loops are typically nonlinear systems. And so you can't study them with paper and pencil methods. And we went to the math department and said, can you design a course like this? And the math department said no, and get out of our office. So that was an unusual experience. We were actually stonewalled by the math department, the leadership of which has now changed, and the math department is much more receptive to this idea because they lost all of their instructor positions. And we just felt that a student wanting to understand the insulin glucose feedback dynamics, to tell them, well, you need to learn L'Hopital's rule first. And then as a junior, you can take an advanced math class that deals with nonlinear equations. That's just not going to fly. So we designed our own course from life scientists who know some math. However, I don't want to badmouth math departments, because since then, a lot of math departments have stepped up and said, we need to have this class, and are trying to teach a class like this at their own institution.
Wow, that's really exciting. Thank you for sharing. So we've got a ton of questions coming in from the chat. So I'm going to pivot to the chat. We have a question from Don Dealin. And this one, we will direct this one to Brendan. So do you think that it is important to build an intuitive understanding of math concepts before introducing the formalisms? And if so, how do you approach that?
Yeah, I think not only do you want to build the intuition, but you also want to build the intellectual need. I think that the way math is traditionally taught is as a bunch of rules that have existed forever, as opposed to the mathematics being, a natural consequence of real questions that people had and needed to answer in order to make headway on some problem. So right now, we've switched gears, and in my class, we're talking about income inequality and the importance of measuring income inequality. And so, we start with the data and the need to understand the data. So if you want to measure income inequality across time or across geography, you need some way to make comparisons as opposed to just unprocessed data. And what I hope that this is doing, it's building the need for more sophisticated tools. And this will drive the conversation towards Gini coefficients, area under curve, and allow us a natural conversation for the fundamental theorem of calculus. And so I think, both centering on intuition and intellectual need is important in teaching.
Thank you so much, Brendan. There's another question here from the chat. This one is for Sarah. Sarah, your initial statement was that students are doing more hands-on things like building boats. Can you share how you assess them? Are you using problem sets, traditional exams, projects?
Sure, that's a great question. And I will say at Olin, we have a lot of different math classes and a lot of different technical classes, and no two are graded the same. They're not assessed the same. But I will say that in most classes, there are a lot of different ways the students are assessed. So they might be assessed in part based on their in-class work. So in our classrooms, we're generally not disseminating information at them for much of the time period that we're together at all. They're more working on things. And so the faculty are really observing them and interacting with them. And so, there's often some kind of in-class, like a assessment going on of, what do you think, how hard are the students trying in class? How on task are they? What are they doing in class? There's often some regular homework. So like problems that they're solving typically, even if it's in an integrated math class that's maybe part physics and part coding and part engineering and part building and part math, there's usually some amount of regular like technical, you could call it math problems that they're doing weekly. That's usually graded in some way. There are usually projects. So whether it's a hands-on building like of a boat that will work in the end, or whether it's something like in my discrete math class, which students of certain majors have to take this class. So I see a pretty good percentage of our students, they are doing projects that usually aren't physical that they're building, but they're building maybe like a coding system, or they're building some kind of app, or they're building like scraping data from Spotify and figuring out how do you code songs and blend them together to make a smooth playlist or something like this. So they're creating something that you can like see or hear. And so we're grading the projects. Some classes have strong components that are grading like the effort, and are the students seeking help in appropriate ways on a week-to-week basis, trying to really, we've noticed when students struggle in college, it's usually not because they didn't learn L'Hopital's rule, which to be honest, I chuckled when that was said because I was like, oh my gosh, I forgot that exists. But usually it's because the students maybe don't know how to seek help, or they don't know where to seek help, especially first generation students. They don't have parents at home saying like, make sure to email your teacher and go to office hours, so we have to kind of get them used to this idea that part of college is like learning to interact with your faculty. It's not like high school that you're just in there for 50 minutes and you go home for the day. So part of our job is to help them understand how to seek help. So some classes have that as part of their assessment. I think at Olin, you're not going to see very many, if any, like timed tests in a classroom. Some classes might have like a big assignment that they have to do individually over the course of, 3 to 7 days, something like that, to get at like individual problem solving skills. A lot of it is group-based grading though. So hopefully that gives you an idea. And basically I'm saying it's not one thing. And I think for me, when I'm designing a class, I'm thinking like, what do I need to know about this student's performance in order to, I do have to provide a grade. And I try to have a lot of different measures. So it's not like, oh, this student does well in the class. The student's like more shy or freezes up in the class. This one's good individual. This one's good at the group. I like to have a lot of different things so I can get a really good like cross section of the student over the, several months that I'll have them.
Thank you, Sarah, for that. So this next question is for Alan, but please, anyone jump in. So how do you bring these approaches to K-12 that have to operate around standardized assessments?
Well, I was going to had a great answer until you said standardized assessments, because I have a problem there. I've given dozens of lectures to high schools on this material. You put a bunch of sharks and a bunch of tuna in a big ocean and what happens? That's not beyond the average high school student. And they can totally understand modeling and they can totally understand why. And unfortunately, we're in a terrible situation now where the high schools feel they have to teach calculus. They have to teach AP calculus to help their students get into college. And the colleges say, well, we have to teach calculus because the high schools are teaching AP calculus. And what are we going to do? And there's this vicious circle that we are trying to break. And this kind of modeling approach, what Brandon is doing, what Sarah's doing, what we're doing at UCLA, that's totally doable at the high school level. As long as you give up this crazy idea that AP calculus must be taught because it's the ticket to college admission. That I think is a very bad idea and a very bad phenomenon. And you'll notice I haven't addressed the standardized testing because what the College Entrance Examination Board wants to do is to create high-profit standardized testing of traditional math concepts because that's what they do for a living. They're not, if you tell them, oh, look at what Sarah's doing at Olin. They build a boat, and if the boat falls over, you need to do more work. Is that a standardized test? I just don't know about standardized testing. I really don't.
Yeah, I just want to add and echo what Alan said. I think his shark and tuna example is a great one. And I think, our students do a similar thing as well. We really believe that modeling is important. That is what people in the real world use math for. It's not to integrate by parts. I haven't integrated by parts in 21 years as a math professor. So I think we could all do without that particular, I won't even call it a skill. But I think that modeling, like since we have it in our head, this shark tuna modeling, I would love it if high schools and below really started working on modeling and the students were working on how do you model a problem. And then as they progress through, we might introduce more and more technical skills, because I think the problem is with the focus on calculus, they don't know, first of all, they don't really understand it. The first time they see calculus, they don't have any sense of how this is going to connect into the world in most traditional calculus classes. And the curriculum is so tightly packed, like that AP calculus BC in particular. I think it is so packed with content that they just don't need to know now that we have like computational tools, that I think most of us in higher ed, it's all within a system, so it's hard to break even if you have a personal opinion. But I really think that the modeling would be more important. And yes, calculus is important. Like engineers do use concepts from calculus, but we don't use the like really low level procedural stuff from calculus. And if students are trying to model and model and model, and then, oh, what happens when this third species is introduced? Oh, we don't know how to do that yet. Okay, well, maybe now we need differential equations, but maybe this is happening as it goes. So I think, if somehow we could work together to get a, kind of a like K through 16 or 18 or however many years, you want to go up, that would make a lot more sense. adding tools as we need them, not tools before we need them.
Yeah, Sarah, I completely agree. And I think everyone on this call, we have a voice and we should be engaging with state leaders. We should be engaging with College Board. We should be asking for a modern curriculum. And, I think there is this disconnect between how math is billed as this tool that can help you understand the world and is essential for inquiry in many different fields and required in the modern workplace, and the reality that our students live, where they're finding this, the asymptotes of rational functions. It's like, these are wildly different experiences. And I think we need to recenter on the quantitative tools that can actually empower our students. And so, I think that takes engagement with, because there are these standardized tests, I think it takes engagement with stakeholders who set those standards. So be it College Board or be it your own states, I think we should all work to engage more on that.
Wow, thank you so much.
Action, Brandon.
I was going to say that that's what we have to do. We have to engage the leaders, our stakeholders, to advance this extremely important work. So we've got another question. This question is from Andrea. She said, I love this point about students seeking to understand their own lived experience and ways to do so through math. Do folks feel that they had to go outside of their traditional math departments to capitalize on those aspects? And I'll open it up for the floor, whoever wants to jump in.
So I'm going to stay silent on this one because we don't actually have departments at Olin. By design, we never wanted to segregate the faculty. We just wanted them to all be working together as one giant unit. So I'm gonna abstain from this question.
Yeah, maybe I could share a slide that I brought here. So I think this is a 2x2. Yeah, this is a 2x2 that I've created that really helps me think about pedagogy and designing classes. On the X, it's unengaging and engaging pedagogy, and on the Y, I originally thought of it as useless mathematics and useful mathematics. So useless, things like L'Hopital's rule or, asymptotes of rational functions. And I think too often I was in the entertaining quadrant, like just having a good time with students, like really interactive classrooms where students are engaging their ideas and really falling short of empowering. And then a colleague said something to me that really stuck. Instead of thinking of useless and useful, you need to think about what's relevant to the individual student. And each student is going to have a different lived experience and see it as, content and as relevant or not based on their own interests and aspirations. I think that's important to realize, like, not all students are going to think that income inequality is relevant for them. Not all students are going to think that electrifying the US auto fleet is something that matters to them personally. And, some students are actually charged by fundamental questions in mathematics. And that then is relevant for them. And that can be an empowering thing. So, I think my superpower as a teacher is trying to understand who my audience is and what the students' interests and aspirations are. And if I can do that, then I can curate experiences that truly are empowering because they're relevant to the individual student. And it's different than being, this binary judgment on whether the math itself is useful or not. Is it relevant to the student? So I think that to me is like a really important takeaway, that different audiences will see different content as relevant or irrelevant.
Thank you. Thank you. That was very helpful. We have a question from Bridget. She said, I don't know how many folks in the meeting are college instructors, but I'm a high school teacher. There are a lot of pressure. There's obvious pressure for students to take calculus, of course, for college admissions. And we have to deal with that. But what do you think are the things that we should be teaching in high school, in math classes? Let's start
Modeling.
with, someone said on here that maybe we should have a AP math modeling class. That was Andrew, perhaps like AP computer science principal classes as well. But going back to that question, what should high school teachers be teaching students in terms of math? Do you want to jump in? I think, Sarah, I hope I didn't cut you off. Okay, what about you, Alan? Modeling, you said. Brendan, do you have anything you want to add?
I like Sarah's point at the beginning that it's really independent of content, and it's more about facing challenging problems, thinking through them. I think getting feedback on that is important. Developing a growth mindset towards mathematics and realizing that you can learn new content. I think the traditional math class operates as this gatekeeper and then creates really negative emotions, and there's this terrible psychology to the whole thing. So reframing the classroom feels important. I think specific content, I'll agree with Alan though, modeling. I think it's because it's a requirement. We frame mathematics as a requirement, and so that means that it needs to help students step up to their own interests and aspirations. And I think the best way that it can do that is if we focus on modeling.
I agree. And I do. I don't think that we can emphasize it enough how important it is to get students involved in that productive struggle, challenging math problems. So it's not so much, as you all said, about the content, it's about being able to persevere. And I think critical thinking and math modeling and giving them real world engaging questions, that does it. There's another question. This one's from Pam Birdman. What you're proposing is quite a rejection of traditional approaches to mathematics. What are the keys to getting buy-in from faculty around making these sort of changes? And anyone can answer that one.
Well, in our case, we got substantial buy-in from life science professors. Like, we recruited 4 or 5 of them to start teaching this class. So that was a big eye-opener for us, was to bring life science faculty into teaching these classes. It's math being taught by people that are not professional mathematicians, and I think that makes a difference. It makes a difference in our approach.
I'll add something to that as well, that I think as a country, there is interest in having people persist in STEM fields, and math is often shown in research to be like a gatekeeper to STEM, the way that a lot of curricula are structured. So one thing that then you look at is, why are people dropping out of math? Why aren't they persisting in math? Why aren't they persisting in STEM? And often the research points to a sense of belonging in STEM. And so if we want more people in STEM, that means we want more people from all demographics in STEM and in math in particular. So then you start looking at the research. Okay, why are women dropping out? Why are students who come from backgrounds that have been historically marginalized and excluded from STEM and excluded from higher ed? And if you look at these students' experiences, what the research then shows is that often it comes down to this: it's a sense of belonging, it's a sense of relevance. Like, is this field relevant to me? And another major component of that research shows that students, from certain backgrounds, certain genders, have a higher desire for careers that matter and that make a difference. There's like a connecting to the real world and to real problems that can be motivating for some students who are dropping out of STEM. And so if you can make math connect to these things that they care about, if you can sit down with a student and say, oh, you like music? Hey, do you like playlists? Oh, that's cool. Like, would you want to learn how to make your own playlists that can beat out all of the commercially available playlist makers, like, well, I'm going to need to teach you about some math and some algorithms and like, let's learn this together. That's going to be a way to keep them interested. So I think if you're trying to like get other faculty on your side, I think using the retention in STEM and, that kind of requires that retention in math, looking at the research, it's pretty clear what the research says are the issues with math and STEM. So making it more relevant could help.
I'll also put a plug.
Thank you for.
Can I put a plug? So this summer, I just am so inspired by Alan's work at UCLA. Harvard Math Department is going to be hosting a workshop, and Alan's going to be there supporting faculty to transform a class at their institution. We realize it is challenging work, but there are so many students in the life sciences who are being held back by a regular math class or regular calculus class. And so in the chat, I just put a link to an announcement of a workshop that Alan and I are running this summer here at Harvard. And I think that it can't be understated that it is work to make that transformation, but it also can't be understated the benefit to students. And Alan, I don't know if you want to talk about some of the results from the study as students persist through the STEM pipeline at UCLA.
This has been published a couple of times. We have a lot of educational psychology people following our class and doing a lot of surveys and stuff like that. The results are extremely encouraging. For example, my lectures right now are 65% female, and UCLA is 50-50. We have a lot of success with people that didn't fit the standard model of success of, oh, I'm good in math. I'm very good in math. I can take the square root of both sides and transpose this into that. That mentality is itself very discriminatory. And we've had a lot of success with minority students and with female students by just bypassing that whole, are you good in math concept, which I really hate. And I think if there's one concept I would banish, it would be the concept of good in math and what that actually means in the minds of the people, which is that I'm terribly clever at manipulating symbolic expression.
Wow,
Brendan,
thank you.
Oh, sorry.
No, please go.
I was going to say, I'm glad that Brendan brought up that workshop, because when I was speaking earlier, I was going to make a point that I think professional development is really important. Like, you can't do this on your own without sort of a group helping you and people to bounce things off with. But then I'm just reading a lot of data about persistence in STEM, so I kind of got off on the tangent there. But I do think going to professional development programs and kind of meeting a tribe, get some other people in your department or even in your like geographical area, I do think it's super important, so that when you're stuck of like, oh my gosh, what do I do? You have some support. And I will say that upfront cost of changing is so worth it, because you don't, as math teachers, I think it can be exhausting day to day dealing with the like, what is this good for? Like, when am I going to use this? And the attitude you get in the classroom from your kind of 9th through 12th graders, that goes away. So there's a lot of upfront work to changing, but then I think you do have like just a more rewarding job when you're connecting with students on their interests and building models and projects and cool stuff, and you're not just every day, oh, like, why does L'Hopital's rule matter? Like, I'm not sure I can pretend that that's important anymore today. So I do think it's worth the investment.
This workshop that Brandon and I are leading at Harvard over the summer is for exactly this audience. People that think, well, this might be interesting. I have no idea how to do it. I'd like to learn how to do it. And I'd like to learn both the content and the pedagogy, and I'm sorry to say, the politics of getting a course like this happening.
Wow, thank you so much. We have about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to try to squeeze one last question in here. A question came in from Carla. She said, it sounds like the students in these courses that you all are talking about have a very specific program or career in mind. She said she teaches at a community college and they need to keep their courses somewhat generic. We also have a high level of students who are not prepared to problem solve with even the most basic concepts. How do you keep the course moving forward if students can't keep up in the problem solving model? Now, let's do 1 minute apiece. Let's start with you, Alan.
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by they're not prepared to do problem solving. If you mean they're not prepared to factor a cubic equation, well, neither am I. So I challenge this idea that they're not ready to do problem solving. They may be not ready to do traditional stupid math tricks problem solving, but they are absolutely capable of asking themselves, why is my boat tipping over?
Thank you so much for that, Alan. Brendan, it's on you.
I put in the chat a link to some feedback from students about the ways that they would see my course benefiting them there in the future. And I think the students speak for themselves in just the ways that the quantitative tools empower them in a range of careers. I do think that there are probably some big buckets to think through. The skills that an engineer needs are probably different than the skills that an economist needs. But at some point, we do need specialization. And I think, last year of high school, first year of college is a totally reasonable time for students to start making choices and participating in that specialization. I think no matter what, it should be focused on, modeling. Obviously there are students who are interested in pure math. That's different. They should have those opportunities too. But I think part of this is teaching problem solving. With these authentic problems, you actually want to build the problem solvers. One thing I should say is that all the students in my course would traditionally be in a pre-calculus class. And so this course is meant to have a very low floor and this high ceiling. And so I think we can create mathematical experiences like that don't require an enormous background of calculus preparation and problem solving. I know I'm at Harvard, but my students, they've excelled at something else in their high school experience. They haven't excelled at mathematics per se, but they're still incredibly successful at this. And I think the opportunity benefits them.
Thank you, Brendan. We have very little time. Sarah, if you can squeeze something in.
Sure. So I think a lot of the answer to this question depends on how many students you have in your classroom, because there are limits to how personalized you can get. But I did teach for 5 years at a land-grant college university. So this is large, multi sections of every course. And I taught it was called Math for Biologists, but it was actually just math for non-math majors. And we would do different units. So we would have, some of it would be math for biologists, some would be math for other areas. And so even if those introductory classes, if you can't personalize to every student in the room, which is a challenge depending on the number of students you have in your room, you could at least go through different applications. Like in this application, these are the kinds of mathematical tools you might use to help solve a problem. And that might even help them decide what they want to do. Like, oh, this is something about like how police tell when somebody died. What was the time of death? Like what's happening there? Like, ooh, what's happening here with sharks and tuna? What's happening here with, something else? So you can maybe just have different themes and introduce math that makes sense in that theme, rather than like introducing math and trying to shove a theme in it, which I think Brendan said earlier.
Thank you all so much for those excellent questions. I am going to turn it over to our host, Zarek.
Awesome. Thanks, Melody. And thank you all. Our speakers had super clear marching orders, so I think there's very little point in me trying to recast anything. So I'm just going to start off with a big thank you to our fantastic speakers, our moderator, and all of you for joining us today. My charge to the audience, whether this conversation resonated with you or whether you totally disagree with everything, we want to keep the conversation going with other members of the Data Science for Everyone community and how we think about education in a world of evolving technology. So I'm going to plug a few ways to do that. We have our Slack channel. We encourage you all to join. We have our newsletter sign up. You can find it on our website, LinkedIn, and Twitter. We also give a big reminder to everyone to visit our resource center if you have questions for how to bring some of these approaches into the K-12 context. We have class materials, data sets, ways to learn mathematical modeling, statistics, and data science in K-12 arenas all listed there. We also want to give a big reminder to everyone to follow our partners at Just Equations, at Harvard, at the Olin College of Engineering, and at UCLA, and to keep following their great work that they share with us today. If you requested a certificate of completion, one will be emailed to you in the coming days, so please be on the lookout for that. And then I also wanted to let everyone know that we will be at South by Southwest Education. So if you are lucky enough to be attending the conference, we will be there in person. We'll be hosting 2 panels on March 7th, and then a meetup, and then another panel on March 9th. If you're planning on attending, we'd love to see you there. You can also add our sessions to your schedule by clicking the favorite button in the South by Southwest social app. We're always happy to connect, so please don't hesitate to reach out, and appreciate you joining us this evening if you're in the East Coast, and probably late afternoon on the West Coast. So hopefully this is a great end of the day. And yeah, thank you all so much for joining our session. Alan signing off.